Okay, so we want to select our polygon now for creating our second tube. And actually, I think instead of using this one, we're going to use this next one over, which we had using kind of a small one to create a blend. But we are going to be upping this to a high resolution later, and we're going to get that geometry. And I think that because of the way the polygons are flowing, it's actually going to be a much better looking if we actually use this polygon right here. So hitting Control T on the keyboard, which is going to bring up our drag tool, which we could also do modify, drag. We're just going to drag these points outward to kind of create our polygon so it's the correct size for creating that artery or tube that kind of comes out of it. And we want to make sure that we're editing some of our other points too while we're doing this, just to keep it blended and all nicely together. But like I said before, we don't really need to majorly tweak it right now because we can do a lot of that later. And some of this stuff is actually going to be covered up by other parts of the model, so we don't even have to worry about a lot of it. So there's no point in spending a whole bunch of time tweaking this and making it look perfect if it's just going to be covered up in the end. So we just want to work with what we have right now and what we know is showing. And come down here, because actually we're going to have this nice flow between these polygons right here and this one that joins up and this extrusion we're going to be creating. So we're going to grab this polygon right now, and actually if we take a look, we'll see that it actually kind of comes out from over here just a little. So we do want to lift up, Control T to drag, and lift up that area just a tiny bit, and then pull that out, and also lift this up just a little. Okay, we'll grab that polygon and hit Shift D on the keyboard. Oh, sorry, Shift F. So we're using smooth shift, and we're going to right mouse click, T to move, and Y to rotate. Just kind of move that into position where it needs to go. And also using all of our viewports as a judge to see where our polygons should be going. Okay, Shift F again, right mouse click, and just doing the same thing we did before, stretching and rotating and moving this stuff into position, all these polygons, making sure it's correct to the image. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is just hide these polygons. Also go in here and select manually some of these other polygons from our other artery and hit the minus key. And as you can see, we left one behind, but we can go ahead and select that and just hit the minus key again, because you can just keep hiding stuff and it's not overwriting anything. So it's not like the cut tool where you're overwriting when you're cutting. It's just you can continuously keep hiding things. So now we have all that stuff hidden, and we can work just specifically on this part of the model, which is going to be much easier now that everything's hidden. And the reason we're not also being totally precise while we're doing this is because you notice we kind of rounded right here, and our points are up here, but once we do Shift F again, right mouse click, and move that out, we'll see that it's actually a little bit bigger than when we had it. So a lot of this stuff you just want to get as close as you can right now, and then go ahead and edit that later. Now I want to create this kind of joint that we have, where we have our polygon coming out, and it's splitting off. And what I'm actually doing for this is slightly rotating it. So what I'm going to do is actually use this polygon to extrude off on this side, and then use this polygon we have over here to bring it off over to the side. So we just want to bring this in just a little bit. And there's many different ways to do this, but this is something I prefer because it's nice and quick. And with a little bit of tweaking, it looks alright. Shift F once again, right mouse click, H, and I'm going to stretch that inward. And you'll notice too, see how we had it before, where that was kind of set up perfectly, now it's off. So you want to make sure you don't do any of your major tweaking until after you get your next extrusion laid out. So we'll just drag that in and select this polygon, Shift F, right mouse click, T to move it out. And we also want to hit H, and we're going to drag that inward, looking at our right viewport, seeing that we are a little bit too far down. It is a little too fat. So we're going to grab these bottom points and just pull that up a little. If we can grab some of the other ones we've wanted to, just kind of pull those up. And that should be good for right now. We'll grab that polygon, Shift F, right mouse click, H, because we're actually doing that start of that hollowed out area. So we do not need to move it right away. And then Shift F again, smooth shift it, right mouse click, T to move. We'll just move it a little bit inward, H, stretch it so it's nice and kind of rounded. But we are going to be working on that later and actually making that so it is nice and hollowed out in the inside. Okay, so we've kind of got that part done, and we're going to move into that a little bit more later. But now we want to grab this polygon on the side over here and actually start extruding from there. And if you notice too, actually, I think I hid this polygon right here, so I'm going to bring that back by hitting the backslash key and just kind of work with it from here. But actually, it's a good idea to have this tube back anyway, just because we're going to be going underneath it. We want to make sure that everything's alright. And that we're not intersecting it at all, so that we don't get a huge surprise once we unhide everything and we find out that it's not correct. So I'm going to hide that bottom part now, which once again is the minus key. And Shift T, I'm just going to do a little bit of editing on this top part right here, just to make it a little rounder. Maybe bring it in just a tiny bit. Okay, so we'll grab that polygon now, and Shift F, right mouse click, and now we can start extruding from there. Just zoom in a bit. And T to move. Oops. Deselected it by accident. And just move that into place. And as you can see, we want it to be a nice transition, but right now we have kind of a weird looking effect, so we want to stretch that inward, rotate it back just a little, and then we're going to extrude from there. But first we want to make sure we get this kind of set up correctly. Shift F, right mouse click, and move that out. And now we can play around with this. Shift T just to make this look a little bit better and a little bit smoother. We're also going to add a little bit of geometry in here, so we can clean it up a bit, because it is kind of a crude method, but once you get enough geometry in there, it should look fine. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that right away before we bring this out any further. And I'm going to select that polygon, or this set of polygons over here. And by holding down Shift from right bracket, we can select up the loop. But since it's connected to the other one, that might not be the most effective way. So I'll just go in here and manually select them, which can take a little bit longer. But we do want to get these out of the way. I'll just hide what we've got so far. Select those, hide those, and that. And once again, we hit something we shouldn't have. So we'll kind of have to do that again. Just making sure we pay attention to exactly what it is that we're hiding, so that we don't have to keep redoing this. And that should be out of the way for the most part. And we'll just go ahead and select that main area again, just to hide that. Okay. So now we can see this a little bit better. It'll be a lot easier to make our cuts. So we're going to use the knife tool, which is Shift K on the keyboard. We just want a knife in here between these two areas, which is going to give us a little more geometry. Control T, and we can drag and just kind of fit that into position. And we just want to go in there and tweak those polygons, those points, so that it looks nice and smooth. And we want to do the same thing to the other side, so Shift K, and we're going to knife it through here. And now we have a little bit more geometry to work with. And one thing you'll notice is that we have this big grouping of polygons right here. We have 5 lines all joining at one point, and you typically want to avoid that. With this technique, it's kind of hard to. And technically this is covered up anyway, which is one of the reasons why I do it this way, is because it is pretty much covered up. And once we get to this high res model, we can go ahead and change a lot of that, or we could clean it up a little before we do that and maybe rebuild some polygons. Go ahead and drag that down, and just tweaking it just a little, which I could probably end up doing for a couple of hours, so I'm just going to go ahead and move on. Alright, so we'll go back here and take a look at where everything should be. And actually we are off of our image just a little. So we do have to move these polygons in, and these points are going to have to move in. Which means a lot of that tweaking I just did doesn't really matter. But we can go back and do more a little bit later. I think we'll have to make some triangles in here a little bit later to clean that up. But right now we're just going to continue on with this tube. Grab that polygon, Shift F, right mouse click, T to move, H to rotate that, and we also should be moving it down, as we can kind of see with this view, although it can be a little difficult to tell because of where we're at. But we can go ahead and switch that to another viewport to clean it up in just a little bit. Shift F again, and we'll bring that to the end. T to move that down, and now we want to stretch that just a little bit downward so that it's kind of tapering. Shift F, right mouse click, H, stretch it in just a little, and then Shift F, right mouse click, T, move it inward, and stretch it again, just so we can create that temporary hollowness within it. And we also want to go in and just kind of clean that up temporarily, just to make it so it's not such a sharp crease, and we have a little bit of rounding that way. And we can edit those inside points as well. Take care of that. Like I said, that's just temporary. We'll be doing that. Finishing that up a little bit later before we go ahead and metaform it, or maybe after we metaform it. But one thing I want to do now is we want to take a look at that curvature. So I'm going to go ahead and switch this from the right viewport to the left viewport, which will show us our curve once we load in that image. So D on the keyboard, go to backdrop, bottom right, and from image right we're going to go to image left and click OK. And now our viewports don't really match up perfectly, but we can edit in this viewport, which is what we need to do most of all anyway, just to kind of line that up. And we did a pretty good job just by using the top and the front or the back like we had before. So sometimes you can tell, but sometimes it is nice to have these other images in here, and especially when we're going to be working on these other parts of the model, which will be a lot more difficult to tell without these other images. So I'm going to switch it back to the right viewport, D on the keyboard, backdrop, BR, and switch that to right, and click OK. So now we want to hit the backslash key to unhide everything and see how this is looking. We notice we do need to tweak this just a little. Where we have it's kind of fat on this side over here, so Control T, we're going to drag these points inward. And what we also want to do is get that point in there, which can be difficult to get, but we can go ahead and select these polygons and then tell from our viewport which one it is. And once we can see it in the perspective view, then we can go in there and edit it in the perspective view. And like I said before, we are going to be metaforming this, so we will have a lot more geometry to work with, so we can make this a lot rounder and a little bit cleaner looking. And I'm just going to expand that full view, which I did by clicking this button up here. Or you could hit 0 on the number pad with the cursor moved over the viewport, and it will expand it to full view. But sometimes it's nice to work like this so we can see a little bit more of what's going on in our model, and we can get some smooth out edges here just by working it with a lot larger. It's a lot easier to see. And all of our tweaking we're pretty much going to be doing in the perspective view, and even some of our modeling, just because it can be easier to work in actual 3D than in the 2D viewports. Alright. And 0 on the number pad to return it back, or you can hit that little tab up there again. And we'll take a look and see how it's matching up to our image, and it looks like it's doing pretty well. And we've got pretty much our major section here is finished for the most part. Finished for this level of geometry anyway. Once we up the geometry level by metaforming it, we'll be going back and adding our other 3 kind of arteries and tubes coming out of the top. And of course cleaning up this and adding some definition in here, which actually we could do a little bit right now just by pulling these down. And we want to lift this up so we have that nice curve in there. Pull that down just a little, and that's just because we have a little bit of a bend in here, and this kind of comes out a little bit more, and that way we have this nice curve that comes in there and adds a little bit of shading in here, which we can also see the shading in our image. There's a little bit of darkness through here, and that's what that's from. And there's also a few other places we might need to do that, but we're going to wait until we have a little more geometry. Okay, so we're pretty much done with this section, so what we're going to do is move on to the other 2 parts. So we have this part right here, and then also this part right here that needs to be done, and the top view is a little easier to see through here, and then this piece right here. And we're going to be doing those in separate layers so that it's easier to work with, and we don't have to worry about interfering with this model. So we'll go into our second layer, and we're going to check this bottom part of our layer to put this in the background if we wanted to, or we could remove it and just work on that one piece, and then once we start kind of intersecting the 2, we can hide this into the background. So let's go ahead and get started on our second piece.